Well, good evening, everyone. The time is now 7 o'clock. I will call the April 17th, 2018 meeting of the Millcreek Township Board of Supervisors to order. Would you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next item on our agenda is public comment on agenda items other than development or rezoning applications. Would anyone like to address the board regarding the agenda? Hearing none, we'll move on. Next item is the approval of the minutes. Do I hear a motion to approve the April 10th, 2018 minutes?
Yeah, I'll move to approve the minutes from that meeting.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any comments?
None from me.
Mr. Groh?
I vote yes.
Mr. Bach?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Next item is the approval of the bills. Is there a motion to approve the bills?
Yes, we got to pay some bills. I so move.
Is there a second?
I will second.
Mr. Groh?
I vote yes.
Mr. Bach?
I vote yes.
And I vote yes. Next item on our agenda is the Early Intervention Program study, presentation, and public comment by the Pennsylvania Economy League, our consulting agency on this project. A brief background, the township sought out state aid from the Department of Community and Economic Development from the state to perform really an analysis of the township's financial condition and also make some recommendations regarding economic development and operational improvements. It's a program the state offers to help local governments find efficiencies in their operations and to give them some perspective on some longer-term financial forecasting for the township. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jerry and Lynn.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. As you mentioned, my name is Gerald Cross with the Pennsylvania Economy League. We represent the Central Division of the Economy League. We are an 80-year-old nonpartisan nonprofit. Our division provides local government consulting services, as you mentioned, particularly under the state's Early Intervention Program. The Early Intervention Program, I think, is a poorly named program. It's really a municipal financial planning program, and I want the presentation tonight to be taken in that concept. I'm going to have with me is Lynn Shedlock. She's one of the principal authors of the report. The report is available for pass out later. It's several hundred pages. We brought bound copies. Our staff of 5 worked on the report, including some consultants that visited the township in the past 6 months. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Lynn, and I will interrupt her as appropriate.
Yeah, Lynn, we do have a microphone over here if you'd like to stand in front of the screen so you can see the screen while you present.
Yeah, sure.
It's up to you.
Sure.
It's not the most convenient setup, I apologize.
That's okay. Yeah. Okay, so, excuse me. This looks at our scope of work. So what we basically did was we analyzed the township's financial history and demographics. So we have a historical view of you, both financially and demographically. And then we projected your revenues. We projected your revenues and expenditures 5 years out. So going back to the history, your financial history, we do 5 years out in terms of your history, and then we do 5 years forward in terms of our projected revenues and expenditures. We reviewed the operations of the Township Police Department. We also took somewhat of a look at your economic development situation. A lot of that dovetailed, paralleled what you're in and Embrace Millcreek. So a lot of Embrace Millcreek's recommendations we would also second and say you should carry through with that, but we'll get into that a little later. And then we compiled recommendations for finance, operations, economic development, and the police. So we're going to start with your demographics. I don't think anything here is going to be new to you guys because, again, you did have the Embrace Millcreek. People have been here, and I think they've done some of your demographics as well. So none of this should be a surprise. You've had steady growth from 1970, but your biggest population increase was between 70 and 80. But you haven't had any drops in population, so that's really good. A lot of your more recent, at least from 90 to 2010, population increase has been the result of people moving into the township as opposed to so-called natural increases, which would be birth rates versus death rates. So you have more people moving in, which is good. Your 18 to 64 population, we did look at your population by age. So we looked at under 18, we looked at 18 to 64, we looked at over 65 and older. And what we found is that your 18 to 64 population was relatively stable. That's very good because that is, in terms of your revenues, that is the population where you're going to get your wages. That's a lot of your homeowners, and that's a stable population, so that's pretty good. You did have a proportional increase in over age 65 of 38%. Again, while you do have some graying there, you do have stability in that really important 18 to 64 demographic. You do want to keep an eye on that, though, on the graying of your population, because that can have some implications that we'll talk about a little later. Okay, so next, this is looking at your housing. Again, you had a steady increase in your housing units. Overall, it was a 26% increase. Your owner-occupied units remained over 60% of the total, which is good. You do have a slight increase there in terms of renters and vacants. The renters could be, I know you're a tourism destination, and we were thinking maybe some of the rentals might be related to vacation rentals. We weren't sure. Again, the uptick in renters and vacant properties is another thing that you want to keep an eye on. And I think both of those trends were things that were identified in your Embrace Millcreek report. Okay, then we looked at median housing value. And you'll see that generally Millcreek is doing better than the county, but is a little lower than the state overall. And the same in terms of income, same pattern. Millcreek is higher than Erie County, but lower than the averages in the state of Pennsylvania. So here were our demographic findings. So you have a growing to stable population size, mostly due to in-migration. You have a stable working population. Your income levels are higher than the county and the state. Do I have that? And your housing values are higher than the county and lower than the state. Your trends to watch are your tax implications from the graying of the population. Obviously, as you get into a higher retiree population, you're going to lose that wage tax because they're retired and they're not working. But as long as you have a good, stable 18 to 64 population, you're okay. That's what you need to watch. And also the slight increase in the rental and vacant units is another thing. Some rentals can be good, but you do want to make sure you don't get too far up in those proportions when you get into sort of blight issues, that kind of thing with vacancies. Or rentals. But as I said, if they're, vacation rentals, you're probably okay. Okay, so now we're going to get into your financials. So you had surpluses every year of the historical period from 2012 to 2016. Your revenue change over that period was an increase of 5.7 million, or 25%. Your expenditure change was also an increase, this time of 5.8 million, or 26%. And as I said, you did have annual surpluses.
I've asked Lynn to let me discuss this slide, which is the market versus assessed valuation. This slide is a good prelude to the forecasts. It's also a good indicator and goes along with the demographics and the housing. What this slide will tell you is that the growth of the township's revenue base was naturally occurring from 2001 through about 2006, and then they had the reassessment years. Development-wise, you had growth in your assessment base. You've seen that in growing townships. You have a very good, stable population. Your 18 to 64-year-old is taxed twice, if you think about it. Real estate taxes, earned income, and property transfers. That's your tax-generating cohort. What we're seeing now, though, is you have had, and we've seen this throughout Pennsylvania, a flattening of assessed valuation growth and an inverse of the assessed valuations over some of the market value in counties. That's resulting in increased appeals. I don't know how much is happening in Millcreek, but you'll see it in the larger commercial and the industrial areas, because we've seen some assessed valuations higher than market value in several counties, which means assessed growth has slowed down from the period of 2008, 2009, when some of these values were higher than the market. I'm sorry, lower than the market. So now you have an inverse where you're about 120 or so % over market value, and you will see more assessed valuations or slower assessment growth. What that means is your tax base for real estate is not growing as fast. It may not grow as fast, and we consider that in the projections. We consider that. The unfortunate part for elected officials is that results in possible tax increases because your natural revenue growth is not occurring. So this slide is important to take into consideration for our projections and our assumptions going forward.
So here are your revenues, your historical general fund revenues. Your taxes make up 70 to 80% of your total revenues, which is not unusual. You have mostly steady tax growth from 18 million to 23.6 million in 2016, which was an increase of 5.5 million, or 31%. So your tax increase, your revenue on your tax side went up 31% over those 5 years. In terms of drilling down a little deeper into the sources, your property taxes, as Jerry alluded to, you had a reassessment. So your property taxes, because of the reassessment, went down a bit in 2013, and then went up by 1 mil in 2014. And then you've been steady in terms of that millage since then. So that's something to keep in mind when you're looking at your tax revenue and your growth. Your non-tax growth, non-tax revenue growth was about 200,000, or 4%. Your largest non-tax sources are cable TV revenue, rental income, and state aid for pension and liquid fuels. So we looked at all your sources: property, realty, wage, LST, public utility. So your property taxes are about 48 to 57% of your total taxes. Your EIT is 42% to 1/3 of your taxes, and your LST is 5 to 6%. So obviously your property is your biggest source, but your wage tax is pretty high up there as well. Yeah, and some of the, some other townships, I would say more rural townships, you might see the wage tax higher than property. That's not unusual for townships. But because of your population, you're actually operating more like a city. We see it's closer. Okay, let's move along. So now we have our historical expenditures, and we have personnel versus non-personnel. Your personnel costs account for about 70% of your expenditures, and those increased $3.2 million over the period, or 20%. Your non-personnel accounts for 30% of your expenditures, and that increased by $2.7 million, or 40%. And just because we don't have the slide up, the personnel expenditures in 12 were about $15.8 million, and in 16 they were about $19 million. On the non-personnel side, it was about $6.7 million in 12, and that went up to about 9.3 in 16. Okay, so the next slide we have gets into your departmental expenditures. By far, the largest departmental expenditure is the police department, which is over 40% of your total expenditures. That department, which was $9.4 million in 12, rose to $11.4 million. Oh, excuse me, I'm looking at the wrong number. $12.1 million in 16. And so the increase was $2.7 million, or 28.5%, and that department pretty much steadily rose. The next largest department after police would be streets, and that is 18 to 20% of your expenditures. That category increased by $1.2 million, or 28% over the period. Although you have to keep in mind that in 16, pension costs were moved over to this line item from a different line item, and so that 16 number includes about $400,000 in pension costs that weren't there in the other years. They were there, but just not in that line item. Okay, next is.
You're heavily invested in police, which is unusual for a second-class township. Across the state, there's 1,700 second-class townships. But the correlation between providing police services in municipalities and the percentage of expenses that are for the public safety is across Pennsylvania. Tomorrow morning, the Local Government Commission is presenting our Communities in Crisis report. We obviously won't be there, but as they look at the tax structure of municipalities in Pennsylvania, they developed the correlation between the early intervention program over the last 10 years, municipalities with police departments, and I think one other one, and they correlated those three. And what it says is when you're providing full services like you are, you're doing everything but a paid fire, which is much more unusual. Your pressures on expenses are what you see here, where they grow $3 and $4 million over 5 years, 20, 25%. Your tax base simply can't grow that fast. So you have to look at that expense. 20 years ago, it was easier. Right? You had population growth and you had assessment growth. Now it's getting harder, and one of the points in the early intervention program is to point out the fact that your resources won't grow naturally, but you'll have to manage them yourself and explain to the public that you have to provide services at a certain level. You also have to pay for that at that level. You don't want to slip into the deficit line.
And I'll just add, because I also was the main author on this, we did correlate, we looked at municipal health in this report, and we did correlate our measures of municipal health with whether or not municipalities had police. And what we found, we had a 1 to 5 scale with 1 being the best and 5 being the worst. What we found was municipalities that have police, like 70% were 4s and 5s. Conversely, those that did not have police, and that can be there's some really wealthy townships in particular around Philly that don't have police, are more likely a 1 or a 2. I checked, because we have everybody in this book, or most everybody, what you were before we started, and you were a 3 on our scale from 1 to 5. We consider a 3 you're doing pretty good. It's medium, it's average, but considering your expenditures, your heavy police spending, you're actually doing pretty good.
You were number 1 in 70.
Yeah.
You look at the 70 score, and you see that across Pennsylvania there's developed townships. Developed townships, much smaller tax burden. When Lynn talks about 1 to 5, we're measuring tax burden and ability to pay that tax burden. So at number 1, you had a relatively low tax burden, and you had a population that could afford perhaps more. So you provided more services over time. That was 40 years ago, 48 years ago. Now you have an increasing tax burden because of legacy costs, you have the infrastructure to maintain, and your tax burden will grow, which it has. You will not necessarily have the growth in the people's ability to pay that tax without them the other day at the grocery store or church or wherever you see them. But it's important for you to understand these are circumstances that everyone in Pennsylvania is facing. I want to say the salad days are over for local government. There's some real fiscal realities we have to face, which is the reliance on property tax for schools, county, and municipal. Remember, most of your services are municipal services. Right. And you probably have the lowest percentage of the property tax budget.
Okay, so now we're going to take a little bit of a closer look at the police department. I did pull out the police department's personnel expenditures. Most of the police department budget is personnel, so I didn't get into the non-personnel expenditures. Personnel expenditures in the police department overall grew by 2.1 million, or 24% over the 5 years. The largest personnel expenditures, and of course this is not going to be any big surprise, salary and wages, which went from 5.4 million to about 6.7 million. They grew 1.3 million, or 23%. The next largest increase was pension, which grew 672,000, or 76%. Most of the non-personnel expenditures were flat or decreased. All right, now the next area that we're going to look at is the dispatching expenses. Dispatching, the 911 dispatching, is part of your police department. Historically, your expenditures for dispatching have been over $500,000. We were able to pull out wages, overtime, FICA, life insurance, and then some small general expense. We were not able to pull out the health insurance expenses for this group. So those health insurance expenses are not included in these totals. But you'll see just with that, it's over $500,000 for that department. Okay, now we are looking at your 2017 estimated versus budget. And you'll see that while your budget anticipated a deficit, you ended up with a surplus. So good job. You went from actually about $1.4 million deficit, and you ended up with a $1.5 million surplus. And the major expenditures that were under budget included police at $944,000, engineering about $500,000, and recycling about $500,000. So what we found through our historical review, obviously you had surpluses throughout the historical review, which is a good thing. You had your 20% property tax increase in 2014. Your tax revenue increased 30%. Your property tax increased 50%. And in terms of, I know Jerry was talking about your assessments. One thing that's good, the fact that the county had those regular assessments, is that you were able to tap into the actual market growth of the properties. That is not the case in most, I don't know if we want to say most, a lot of other counties.
Many of the urban counties are behind in their assessments, their reassessments. County commissioners tend to fear them. Now, whether or not they'll do that has to do with the years of the story. But the county commissioners take the blame for assessment, and they tend to get stale. And what happens is your municipalities are working on tax base of 50%, 40% of market value. So you're under taxing the wealth and overtaxing certain segments of the population. You don't see that here.
Yeah.
My concern here is for the common level ratio being over market value, which can conceivably lead to large appeals of individual property owners that have worthwhile, and then you get into a situation where assessment is decaying and you're putting money back into the tax rebate to lose the fee.
So I guess you can't win. If you're doing well, then they're going to appeal, and if you're not doing well, you're not going to get the value. So welcome to local government. Yeah. Obviously, the other finding, police costs are your largest general fund expenditure by far, at over 40% of expenditures, and dispatching within that department is a considerable expenditure of over $500,000 annually. Next, we looked at your, we calculated your projections, and you have the assumptions there. We base our projections on a certain set of assumptions. One of the assumptions is that we don't assume that you're going to raise taxes. We don't assume that you're going to take on any new debt. We allow for some natural growth in your taxes, depending on the historical patterns and the assessment versus market value, that sort of thing. On the expenditure side, we look at your contracts, and we plug in those, any sort of raises that you had in the contracts. Otherwise, I think we did a 2%. Yeah, we assumed 2% throughout the period. We grew, yeah, I was going to get there.
If you notice, the healthcare has gone up in the last 5 years. We're seeing that 6% hold, but we see some municipalities a little bit higher, and some are actually at 25. So 6 seems to be where it's at. That's down from 12 10 years ago. But 6 seems to be holding, so we felt comfortable keeping that projection at 6 because that's a big driver of your expenses. If it comes in at 4, you'll be able to adjust market level, adjust our assumptions by plugging in that lower number, and that will change your expenditure profile. We're going with 6 because that's what we're seeing.
And then we also just overall grow expenditures based on the CPI, just so you have a little annual growth there. So what we saw starting in 2018 are deficits that start in 18 and continue through 2022. The deficit that we have projected for 18 is 4.2 million. Then we go to 3.1 million, 3.5 million, 4 million, and 4.4 million in 2022. So we know that you do have a considerable fund balance, which will help you with some of this. Our understanding is that at the end of 2017, you had a fund balance of almost 8.7 million.
Put that in context, that's about 25% of the expenditure. The Government Finance Officers Association, we got the other acronym, some of the government accounting boards.
GFOA.
We like to see 25 to 50% of expenditures in reserve, financial, and you're at the lower end of that scale, but you do have a good fund balance. You get a little bit after about 25%. So it seems like a large number, but in reality, it's about a third, 3 months operating expenses. So that's maybe one of your target is to consider funding your expenditure of that.
Jerry, just to clarify on that one, Mark, I believe second-class township code restricts what our reserve can be?
Yeah, my understanding is it can't be more than 25% of, well, I don't know if they, I think it's 25% of revenue.
Yeah, your expenditures. Yeah, because you want to.
Well, no, I believe the second-class township code restricts townships from exceeding a fund balance of that.
Yeah, you can assign some of the capital and different things, and I think that's off that side.
Yeah.
You're where you should be for your classification of government. I'm used to seeing people with no fund balance. Okay? And you try to build that fund balance up over time. So you have a projected deficit. The problem is you can eat that away very quickly. And that's the next one.
So, yes, so if you use your fund balance to, if these projected deficits do occur, if you do use your fund balance to erase them, this fund balance would be depleted in 2020. And the accumulated deficit is anticipated to be about 10.6 million. Right.
One of the assumptions of early intervention is to give the governing body the worst case. We like to say it's the, if it's close to the Christmas, we would say it's the ghost of Christmas future. It can happen. It could be changed. It may not happen.
He's stealing my lines, but he's my boss, so he's allowed to.
So we have to provide the baseline with no assumed governmental action. So you know that there has to be actions taken over the next 5 years. That it isn't simply steady as you go.
Okay, so in terms of your projected revenues, your tax revenue is projected to account for about 80% of your total revenues, which is pretty much in keeping with your historical pattern. Your tax revenues are anticipated to increase by 1.1 million, or 5%. And that tax growth is split between EIT, which we have projected at about 500,000 growth, or 7.1%, and property, about 420,000, or 3.2%. Your non-tax revenue is expected to grow by about 472,000, or 9%. All that growth is projected from state sources, which would be liquid fuel, pension, and foreign fire aid. In terms of expenditures, again, your largest expenditure and largest projected increase over the 5-year projected period is in police at a growth of 1.7 million, or 12%. And so in 2018, we start at 13.8 million for police, and that grows to 15.5 million by 2022. The growth in streets is about 375,000, or 6%, starting at 6.7 million and growing to 7 million. And in terms of administration, your growth there is expected at about 245,000, or 9.4%, growing from 2.6 million to 2.9 million. Okay, so in terms of our findings, your projected growing annual deficits threaten to deplete your fund balance if that's what you use. But historically, you have been a fiscally healthy community. You had no deficits historically. You had anticipated a deficit in the 17 budget, and you came out with a surplus. So you've been very good at annually coming out with surpluses. As Jerry said, the projections are only one possible scenario. It's the ghost of Christmas future. It's what might happen if you don't take steps now. But now you can because you know about it. So that's what you should do, is take steps now to control your expenses and provide sufficient revenue. So what we did in our report is we provided you with some suggestions for that so that you can provide the township with sustainability. We have cost controls, we have revenue enhancements, we have operational improvement recommendations, and we also have recommendations that will be eligible for phase 2 grant funding from the state. So in terms of our findings and recommendations, the major financial recommendations, and I can't even tell you how many recommendations. I'm not going into all of them, I'm just pulling out the major ones. So one thing you want to do is review the sewer management fee, which is paid to the sewer authority for repairs and improvements. We're saying you should take a look at that fee, and we're suggesting that you seek phase 2 money to do that study. We think you should consider a stormwater management fee. I know you're in the process right now of reviewing that, what you need to do for your stormwater management controls. You can try getting phase 2 for that, or possibly look to the state for other sources. We're not sure if phase 2, if the state will be allowing phase 2 money for that.
We are funding a MS4 study in southwestern PA. I don't remember the municipality, but they're in the cycle to be funded before July 1st. So they are looking at MS4 as a problem. If you're large enough that you have the ability as a second-class country to levy your own fee and have some authority. But the regional approach to stormwater allows for cheaper mitigation. I know the Commonwealth, of course, is looking at regionalization of stormwater, and that's one of the areas where it actually makes sense. I'm in the school that regionalization only makes sense when you save the service. For too long it was sold as cutting costs, and that usually doesn't happen. The stormwater management, because the rain falls across a wider area, and the minimum control measures sometimes cross borders, it may make sense to look for a regional partner in stormwater. I know you're doing that, but you may want to consider at least asking Ed or his boss in Harrisburg about the possibility of funding an MS4 study to see if you can lower the possible creative cost you may have for that. We've seen at least the Department of State and Chesapeake Bay, because they've been hit heavy with the phosphorus reduction with Susquehanna. Once you get over the mountain, it's a different concern, of course, for where you are. But nonetheless, that stormwater fee is going to be an issue that possibly can be mitigated by looking outside of the building. But again, you're big enough, you can build and control it yourself. But we recommend at least ask for a grant to help.
And just to go back a minute for the sewer management fee, just a point I wanted to add. The payments on that fee have been increasing. We did pull those out, and in the main report, you'll see we have a table showing what the payments are. The payment in 2016 was $757,000. So the idea would be to assess the fee to consider its elimination. Then there's one for study 911 services. Again, we're suggesting that you seek phase 2 grant money to conduct this study. The dispatching services are obviously costly and potentially could be taken over by the county. On the other hand, you might want to provide that service yourselves. So that's a policy decision in terms of the service. Do you like the service? Do you want to pay for the service and keep the service, or do you want to move over to the county? Another one is to explore options to improve efficiency and sustainability of fire protection. We understand that there are equipment cost and staffing issues. So what we feel you need to do is assess and analyze the needs with your fire and EMS commission. And again, that would be something you want to look for phase 2 money for. Another recommendation we had was potentially exploring home rule options for revenue flexibility. And I guess home rule has been discussed around here. We are not talking about home rule necessarily in terms of changing the form of government. With home rule, you can have some flexibility in your tax mix, so that if you would like to, for instance, maybe put a little bit more on the wage tax as opposed to raising your property taxes, and give your retired seniors a break, that's something you could do under home rule, something you can't do now under the second-class township code. So that's something you might want to think about. It is a long, involved process, though.
One of the dilemmas, that you're seeing is your revenue flexibility is real estate tax, the most unpopular tax.
That's right.
Because of the way it's collected, the way it's levied, it's problematic. I've been in local government long enough that I remember when home rule was strictly a good government efficiency and effectiveness initiative. And I go back to '76. Home rule in the last 10 years has been utilized by municipalities to allow the tax mix or tax shift within the 511 taxes. The 3 taxes that are affected by home rule, there's 4, but one is problematic. Real estate transfer, you're fixed at 0.5%. Earned income, you're fixed at 0.5% and share with the district. And property. Home rule also allows the local services tax and flexibility, but you can't touch non-residents, so it's kind of a problem if you look at local services. My point being, when you look at the historical trend, you're closing in on EIT was getting equal to property. And when you had to raise taxes or respond to a slowing assessment base, conceivably you could have changed the mix by having a 0.6 or a 0.7 EIT versus a 2 mil or 1 mil increase in property. The problem is, the law is still in the good government stage where you need, and it's logical if you think about it, you need a citizens commission, you need a recommendation, you need a drafting, it takes multiple years, you don't know what's going to come out at the end of it. I have worked in second-class townships where we reviewed the government study commission. We utilized the second-class township code. We changed small things within the code to make it more of the urban environment, and adopted that as a whole new charter. That allows flexibility. I've only done that once, but I think more. I've done another second-class township in southeastern Philadelphia, Stockton, Delaware County, where they wanted home rule to expand their board and also to put some policy considerations into place. But they also looked at tax shift because of the wealth, the inherent EIT wealth, and also the large property wealth, that they have a large non-profit sanctuary. So they were worried about the increasing need for property taxes. So in the past, I know people at a certain age think of government study commissions perhaps as troublesome or perhaps ill-advised because people tend to use those as political weapons. In the last 10 years, we're seeing more and more consideration to get out from under the 511 tax law. You could have a 14 you see that more and more as the growth in townships is slowing down. We're starting to see consideration of how do we change our tax mix. So one of our considerations over the next 5 or 10 years, whatever, is to think about the pressures that 511 caps put on you as a municipality, where your growth and your natural increases in tax base slow down.
Okay, another recommendation is to consider strategies to lower or sustain your police costs, since that is obviously where a large percentage of your revenues are going. And then we also have a recommendation to upgrade your financial software, which is, again, something that you should look at in terms of EIP Phase 2 funding. Other major recommendations include implementing your Embrace Millcreek plan, both in terms of possibly revamping your zoning code, and also looking at those other recommendations in that plan and executing those as well. And then we have a number of recommendations that are sort of kind of personnel operations based. Develop, review, and update policies and procedures, performance evaluation system, organizational objectives, document management system, and a fleet analysis. Again, those are things you should see about Phase 2 funding.
You want to discuss that with Ed. There's priority shift every year in Phase 2, but if they're not in the initial EIP plan, you don't have a chance to get a funding. So we throw the kitchen sink in there with the broad view of 4 or 5 years, and depending on its priorities from the department. 1 year funding, Phase 3, Phase 4. I see this kind of run to Phase 5 funding as they narrow the scope. And that's really what urban intervention is about, reducing the inefficiencies in things that you can control now by changing some operation of the state becoming your partner and helping the fund. Of course, it's a match on Phase 2, but it's more general.
So that is the end of the presentation. Any questions?
Any questions from the board?
Well, just not a question, but a comment, maybe just a couple of comments. Thank you, first of all, for this. I know that you worked very diligent with us and a lot with John Morgan in reference to this this study. There's a lot of truths that come out of this here, and it's not only for the Board of Supervisors to hear, but also for the residents of the township to hear. You know, that we can see things happening, and by no means is the township in financial trouble now. You heard the term early intervention program. By no means are we anywhere near Act 47. So anybody that reports it that way, they're misinformed and they're twisting a story. But I want to emphasize the fact that these are things that we can do. It's just a matter of picking out which ones we want to do, all of them, one of them, part of them, something that would hopefully get us in a better financial situation as we head down the road. You can't let the good times go on forever, you know, and, you know, like you said, you know, our taxing ability is limited right now the way it is. You know, anybody suggesting an income tax or any sort of tax increase would be, you know, the most hated person out there. Like you said, you see him at the grocery store, you see him at the golf course or wherever, and that's the first thing you hear about. This right here, I think is going to give us some options there, you know, many options that we can do. Cut our costs, also finding other taxing revenue, sources for that, for taxing. So.
Yeah, we're not doing that. We left Lynn's on the way out. We leave our magic bullets at home.
Right.
You have none. Quite frankly, the Commonwealth has an archaic system of local government taxation.
Oh, yeah.
And it's evident. Second-class townships have a lower cap of property tax millage because it's assumed you're still rural.
Yeah.
It assumes that all the wealth in Erie County is in the cities of
Right.
Erie County. That hasn't been true in 30 years.
Right.
So you're battling modern expenses, legacy costs, because you've had a professional department long enough. Your pension is, you saw it go up by 600,000.
Right.
All those things have to be fought with archaic tools. That's a problem. And citizens don't understand that. Citizens think, if I just ran for office and got elected, I can cut costs. 6 months later, the guy they beat looks like the smartest guy because they realize it becomes a very, very tight box to get yourself out of.
The first 2 points I find not interesting. Yeah, we knew this right here. Stormwater management is a big problem here. We've had so many years of uncontrolled development in which stormwater wasn't considered. Now we're trying to close the barn door afterwards, and it's painful. We need to find something, and I agree with you as far as a regional authority or a regional agreement. We don't always generate our own stormwater here. We're heading down to the lake. You know, lake level is 577 feet above sea level there. You know, we've got Summit Township, which is another, I think, 500 feet above us. So, you know, you can see how it's all sloping down. We're getting Summit's water too. Not blaming Summit, it's the flow of water. It's what happens, you know, flows downhill.
It's the old, the rain falls on the just and the unjust.
Right.
But you have to accommodate what falls.
Exactly.
EPA doesn't look at rainwater as a municipal problem. They look at it as a pollution problem.
Right.
Where I come from, we recently had a 36-member, but it's a regional sewer authority. They treat 100,000 customers. 36 municipalities are treated by this. They put together under the umbrella of the sanitary authority a wastewater compact, intergovernmental compacts, to be co-permittees, so that the authority was allowed to develop a master plan that wiped out the municipal borders. So when you put a control measure in Town A, Town B got credit for it. And the only way they're able to do that is by having intergovernmental agreements. You know, they're an existing authority. That's where I really think the future of stormwater has to be, because as those requirements get stricter and stricter over the next 10 years, remember, you have to go into construction phase.
Yep.
You've only got your local square footage or whatever your ERU will be to fund that. And once you start levying a fee, it's hell to pay to raise it.
Yes.
And we would encourage regional solutions. One of Pennsylvania's problems is that the default is always just to do everything within your own municipality. And that's one of the problems. Also, as a township, as Jerry mentioned, and I had actually forgotten, you only have 14 mills. Well, that's because you're a township and you're not supposed to have a police department. You know, you're a township.
Tell our residents that.
But so your mill, you know, if you were a borough, you'd have 30 mills.
Right.
But because you're a township, you only get 14 mills. So you're at a disadvantage there right from the beginning.
They modernized they modernized the municipal codes last year, 2 years ago, 3 years ago.
I know.
But they didn't modernize the thinking behind them. The thinking behind the codes always is wealth is in a certain place and we will allow a tax on wealth. Wealth used to be defined by owning a home. The GI Bill, bank, everybody's changed it over the last 50 years. Home ownership is no longer a measure of wealth, but boy, it's a measure of a place to go for taxes. And the citizens don't like it, so it's really incumbent on all governments to consider avenues to get away from property taxes. But it's a box.
Okay.
You're in a box.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation.
Mr. Bonk, do you have any questions or comments for the consultants?
I just echo a lot of what Mr. Gross said. Just thanks the Economy League for doing this. I think it was a smart move on the township's part to have this done, and gives us a lot of information to digest and analyze, and it's good information. So we're gonna look at it hard.
And we can provide our model mark for budget assistance, and when you start to develop your 2019 budget, we're able to help you run some models. We're available in the program.
Yeah.
So our contract's over now, and the phase 2 grants would not involve us, but we like to stay involved as maintain our shop.
Right. Yeah. Jim said digest. I think there might be some indigestion in this here too. So hopefully not much, but Thank you. Yeah, it is. Yeah, thank you.
Is there anyone in the audience that would like to ask any questions or make any comments to the board regarding the presentation at this time?
Okay, thank you, folks.
With that, do I hear a motion to accept the analysis and recommendations from the Economy League?
Yes, this is just for clarification, this is an acceptance of it. We're not taking any action to adopt it, just an acceptance of the report. Am I correct on that there,
Well,
John?
it's, I think, whatever you would like to call it.
For
it-
clarification
it's-
purposes, so the record reflects that. If it's for acceptance of the report, yes, I will make that motion to accept the report as presented.
Is there a second?
Yes, I will second that.
Mr. Groh?
I vote yes.
Mr. Bach?
I vote yes.
And I vote yes, and I'll just add, I appreciate Jerry and Lynn mentioning the Embrace Millcreek plan we're working on. I know when I approached Mr. Groh, Mr. McGrath last year about having the study done, it was always the intent of it to be done in concert with Embrace Millcreek to give us really a real assessment of where we're at as a township. I think anyone who's participated in our Embrace Millcreek neighborhood meetings or community meetings or looked at the data that's been provided so far in that process, it's very similar. It's that we are riding high as a community currently, but there are some concerning trends regarding creeping blight, regarding disinvestment in commercial corridors, and I think this just echoes those kinds of growing concerns that we do need to start planning for the future. We do need to start thinking 5 and 10 years down the line and start addressing those concerns now. I think these recommendations, along with the comprehensive plan, Embrace Millcreek, that will be available to the public in May for review, I think both recognize those things and will hopefully help us to get on the right track.
Okay, thanks, John. Thank you for your work on that there, too.
Thanks. With that, next item on our agenda, bids and quotations. First is the supply and installation of fire alarm control unit for garages from the Department of Public Works.
Good evening, gentlemen. Late last year, the Buildings and Ground Bureau Chief had a survey done of our alarm system, fire alarm system in the township. We came up with 3 glaring problems. There was the alarm box in the mechanics garage needed updating, and we also had 2 buildings that weren't alarmed at all. Those being, I think we've named them 5 and 6. So we sought quotes, and there was a wide range of cost here. The number 1 was Doyle Security for a cost of $66,665.77. New Sentry Systems at a cost of $32,940 even. Price and Security for $19,337 even. Wilkins Company for $18,787. It would be my recommendation that we have Wilkins Security do this work.
Gary, when you were reviewing the quotes, did you get a handle on why there's such a vast differential between?
Yes.
I
The
mean,
larger
we've got
ones
almost
added on.
$50,000 difference between the
Right.
two.
The larger ones added on a lot of stuff that we didn't ask for. They're looking for doing a complete system. So there was a lot of upgrades in those that we really didn't ask for.
Okay.
Okay,
Any other questions from the board?
not for me.
Is there a motion to approve the quote and approve a contract with Wilkins Company, total cost of $18,787?
Yes, I'll move for that contract.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Groh?
I vote yes.
Mr. Bach?
I vote yes.
And I vote yes. Thank you, Gary. Next is the tree removal request from the Public Works Department.
We received a complaint about a tree on Southview between Hillwood and Clinton. Upon investigation, the tree does sit in the township right away. The tree is completely hollow and really creates a danger for not only the public, but the land around it also. So we would recommend having that taken down. We received 3 quotes. Dibble Tree Service for $400, J. Thomas Tree Service for $395, and Leopold Tree Service for $275. It would be my recommendation that we give the job to Leopold Tree Service.
Any questions from the board?
That does include stump removal for all those bids there.
Yes.
So Leopold 275 with stump removal.
Right.
Okay.
Any other questions? Is there a motion to approve the quote to Leopold Tree Service for $275?
Yes, I'll move on that contract.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Groh?
I vote yes.
Mr. Bach?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Next is COG Joint Purchasing Bid Results for aggregate and rock materials.
Did you have that? You don't? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Okay, this comes from the COG, of course, under the joint purchasing. Type C, number 57, the vendor that responded, let's see, it was ACA at $15.50, $15.50. Erie Sand and Gravel was $25.15, and Gertz Sand and Gravel was $15.15. So I move that we award that, the Type C, number 57, to Gertz at a cost of $15.15 per ton. That is per ton, right? Do you have a copy of that there, Tom?
Yeah.
Yeah, right there.
Gary, you were unaware of these bids coming in from the COG?
Yes, I didn't know that they were coming, so that's why I don't have a copy of it.
Yeah, these were the ones that we didn't get before. Is that correct, Cheryl? These aggregates on the joint, from the COG, the purchasing, these were not on the original.
These were not purchased by the township directly, these were not purchased by COG in large quantities for all of the.
Right. Right, so this is what we're,
These were opened on the 10th.
right, so that's what these are about right here. And the recommendation is that purchase from Gertz at $15.15 per ton.
All right, did you make a motion, John?
Yes, I put that in form of motion, I'm sorry.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Groh?
I vote yes.
Mr. Bach?
I'll vote yes.
And I vote yes. Next on the agenda is consideration of land development and subdivision plans. First is the Sarah A. Reed Children's Center Land Development Plan, a land development plan to show the construction of a 5,140 square foot residence hall with associated parking and stormwater facilities located along the south line of West 34th Street, south of Highland Road, and Track 77, Index 348-003.
Thank you. Good evening. At their meeting of April 3rd, 2018, the Millcreek Township Planning Commission recommended approval of this land development plan with the following minor drawing corrections: that they list the correct zoning district, change it to R3, that they indicate the correct owners' names on the adjacent parcels, that they add the dimensions to the proposed addition in the existing buildings, and that they indicate the total development in acres on the plan. All of those are procedural issues which the Planning and Development Department will make sure are done before the plan is recorded.
Is there anyone present to speak on behalf of this land development plan?
Good evening, Supervisors. Ashley Porter, Consulting Engineers, here representing the development. As was mentioned, we've submitted the land development. It's gone through the county and township planning commissions. We've made the requested revisions, correcting some errors we had in zoning statements, and we're here ready for approval. If there's any questions, we're happy to field those.
Any questions from the board?
None from me.
Nope.
Mr. Mulder, were any concerns expressed by the Planning Commission or residents at that hearing?
I believe there was one resident who questioned the location of the building in relation to their property, but no, there were no concerns by the planning commission.
Anyone else in the audience care to address the board regarding this development? Please state your name and address for the board, please.
Yeah, Shalane Beeler, 100 State Street. I'm with Beeler and Associates Architects. I'm the architect for the project, and I'm also a board member for the Sarah Reed Children's Center. And there was one neighbor that was at the Planning Commission, was concerned about noise and so on. And I did talk to James Mando, who's the CEO, just to confirm our stance on this. And all children are always supervised. They're not outside unless there's a staff member there, and it's typical playing of children, typical noise and playing of children. It's not rowdiness and so on. They're always supervised. So we just want to reiterate that that is, it was a concern, we appreciate that, but it's nothing different than any other neighborhood with kids playing.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments?
Nope.
Mr. Walding, you said the Planning Commission and your staff recommend approval?
That's correct.
Is there a motion to approve the Sarah Reed Children's Center Land Development Plan?
Yeah, I'll move to approve that.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Mr. Groh?
I vote yes.
Mr. Bach?
I vote yes.
And I vote yes. Next item is the estate of Margaret D. Regala, small subdivision plan. A small subdivision plan shows the creation of a 31.04 foot times by 1408.70, this is very precise, 97 foot parcel, which will become an integral part of the neighboring property, Erie County Tax Parcel 33-139.0-554-002, located along the south line of Emily Road, south of Lancaster Road and Tract 350, Index 605040. Mr. Waldinger.
At their meeting of April 3rd, 2018, the Millcreek Township Planning Commission recommended approval of the subdivision with the following requirement, as you listed, that the subdivided parcel become an integral part of the neighboring parcel.
Is there anyone present to speak on behalf of this land development plan? I'm sorry, small subdivision plan.
Jim Welka, 3200 West 32nd Street. I represent the estate of Regala in this small subdivision to convey a strip of land. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions or comments from the board?
Nope, none from me.
Any concerns expressed to the Planning Commission?
No, there were none.
Any other residents would like to address this issue? All right. There's no further comments. Is there a motion to approve the small subdivision plan for the estate of Margaret R. Regala?
Yes, I'll move to approve that minor subdivision plan.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Groh?
I vote yes.
Mr. Bach?
I vote yes.
And I vote yes. Next is the small subdivision plan for Timothy R. and Lorraine R. Fritz. A small subdivision plan shows the creation of a 1,614 square foot parcel, which will become an integral part of the neighboring property, Erie County Tax Parcel 33-006-026-018, located along the west line of Marshall Drive, north of Westlake Road and Tract 9, Index 214-021. Mr. Waldinger.
Thank you. At their meeting of April 3rd, 2018, the Millcreek Township Planning Commission recommended approval of this subdivision with the requirement that you listed that the subdivided parcel become an integral part of the neighboring parcel.
Does anyone speak on behalf of this small subdivision plan?
I represent Fritz. Pretty straightforward subdivision.
Okay. Any questions or comments from the board? Would anyone else in the audience like to address the board regarding this small subdivision plan? Mr. Walder, any concerns expressed to the Planning Commission?
There were none.
And no further comments. Is there a motion to approve the small subdivision plan for Timothy R. and Lorraine R. Fritz?
Yeah, I'll move to approve that subdivision plan.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Groh?
I vote yes.
Mr. Bach?
I vote yes.
And I vote yes. Thank you, Mr. Welcome.
Thank you.
Next is a small subdivision plan for Full Circle Holdings LLC, a small subdivision plan to show the creation of a 20 foot by 167.48 foot parcel, which will become an integral part of the neighboring property, Erie County Tax Parcel 33-039-143-005, located along the west line of Woodside Drive, south of Westlake Road, and tract 281, index 141-015. Mr. Waldinger.
Thank you. At their meeting of April 3rd, 2018, the Millcreek Township Planning Commission recommended approval of this subdivision with the requirement that you listed that the subdivided parcel become a part of the neighboring parcel.
Mr. Walker.
Yes, I represent Full Circle on this small subdivision.
It's a busy day for you, sir.
Yeah, very busy week.
Any questions from the board?
I just have a quick comment here as per the advice of Mark Shaw. I did make an inquiry into this. The recipient of the property next door that's going to be purchasing that is my cousin, and I guess, Mark, am I correct that there's no conflict of interest on that or any possible ethics problems there?
Correct. Since the cousin's not a member of your,
Right.
immediate member of your family,
Yeah.
those conflict rules don't apply.
Yeah,
So
Nancy Hearn is my first cousin, so, okay. Yeah, I just want to make that for the record. If you would put that on there, Cheryl, okay, thank you.
Any questions from the board?
No, sir.
Anyone in the audience care to address the board regarding this small subdivision plan? Any concern expressed to the Planning Commission, Mr. Walding?
There were none.
All right. Is there a motion to approve the small subdivision plan for Full Circle Holdings LLC?
Yeah, I'll move to approve that.
Is there a second?
I will second.
Mr. Grove?
I vote yes.
Mr. Bach?
I'll vote yes.
And I vote yes. Next is the land development plan for DJC Associates, a land development plan to show the construction of a 344 square foot addition with associated parking and stormwater facilities located along the north line of West 26th Street and east line of Loveland Avenue in tract 19, index 307-043. Mr. Waldinger.
Thank you. At their April 3rd, 2018 meeting, the Millcreek Township Planning Commission recommended approval of this land development plan with the following items. They heard the request of the developer that the land development plan land bank 4 parking spaces for future use, and their request that that be approved by the supervisors, and that a drawing correction be made to indicate the dimensions of the existing and proposed building.
Mr. Welcome.
Yes, we made the additions to the plans that show the dimensions of the addition, and with your consideration, we would like you to approve the construction of the 4 parking spaces that were land banked.
Any questions or comments from the board?
What, is this the business, the dentist?
This is the dentist, yes.
Okay, right on the corner.
Yes, they're adding 2 new dental chairs, and they have a need for some parking. They have 9 employees and a total of 5 chairs. So this will give them adequate parking. And it does have a stormwater management facility that was reviewed and approved.
Okay. Any further comments from anyone in the audience like to address the board regarding this land development plan? Any concerns expressed to the Planning Commission, Mr. Waldinger?
There was just discussion about the parking. The issue is that the township's code has a cap of 120% of the required number of parking spaces on a new development. This development would include 4 additional. The code allows the developer to land bank those parking spaces and construct them at a future time, and that's what the developer is seeking to do.
Okay, so you have no concerns about that, Mr. Waldinger?
No concerns.
Any further comments? Thank you, Mr. Welcome.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I would, on the land banking question, I would suggest that the supervisors vote first on approving the land development plan and then vote second on approving the request to use those land banked spaces as 2 separate decisions.
Okay.
Is there a motion to approve the land development plan for DJC Associates?
Yes, I'll move to approve that.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Grove?
I vote yes.
Mr. Bach?
I vote yes.
I vote yes. And is there a motion to approve the development of the 4 land banked parking spaces?
Yes, I so move on that.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Groh?
Yes.
Mr. Bach?
I vote yes.
And I vote yes. Mr. Volk, you sure you're done?
Put them on the payroll.
Next is Tillinghast Village Land Development Sketch Plan, a land development sketch plan to show the concept of a 76-unit, 5-building housing complex with associated parking facilities. Is there an issue going?
You approved the land development plan, you didn't approve the land bank, except the land bank.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, we did.
Yes. I'm asleep. Okay. Sorry.
Okay.
A land development sketch plan to show the concept of a 76-unit, 5-building housing complex with associated parking facilities located along the south line of Golf Club Road and the west line of Interstate Route 79, Track 77, Index 608-055. And just to clarify for everyone in attendance, there will not be formal action. This is simply a proposal for the board's consideration for a concept that the property owner would like preliminary comments from. I believe it went to the Planning Commission. Mr. Waldinger, I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, at the April 3rd, 2018 Planning Commission meeting, this plan was presented. It was discussed by the commission. I believe they looked generally in favor of the plan as presented with some issues. They did have one comment that they would like to see from the developer. Since the developer is proposing this as a conservation design, they would like to see a number of the actual developable, or the amount of the developable area that is actually going to have buildings on it and the amount that is going to be preserved. They wanted to know those numbers. They thought that would be beneficial.
Okay.
Please state your name and address for the board, for the record.
I'm Marvin Gold. I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm the co-owner of the property that abuts Erie Golf Course. My partner and I bought this property about 45 years ago. One of the reasons, well, the reasons we bought it was because of the mature trees, the beauty of the property, the streams and the topography, and also the thing is it was near the interstate exchange and the mall that was going in at that time. Over the years, we've been good stewards, and when we had it rezoned, started thinking about how are we going to use this. And as far as the rezoning, I want to thank the supervisors for their decision, and not only that, but the going through the court system and appeals and winning both of those and supporting that decision. When I started working with Mike Sanford, we looked at what R2 allowed, and basically single-family homes or duplexes, and to maximize it out, I would have had to cut down every tree, fill up everything with either streets, driveways, sidewalks, and backyards. And I just didn't see that being what I wanted to do with the property. So we looked into a conservation easement with the idea of concentrating the units in one place while still honoring the residential nature to it and preserving a lot of green space around there, protecting the drive. As you're coming into the golf course, you won't be able to see these units. And so that's why we came up with this concept. Mike can explain more of the details, and he did the calculations that the Planning Commission was concerned about.
Good evening, Mike Sanford, 4721 Atlantic Avenue, and appreciate your time this evening. As Marvin indicated, this is a sketch plan. We're just here to receive some feedback from you folks on our plan that we've submitted. At the Planning Commission meeting, they did request an idea of what the open space calculation was. With the conservation development design, that's one component. It's, you take a look at the gross land and what's wetland, steep slope, floodplain, and then you arrive at developable land. And so one of the Planning Commission members asked what that percentage was. I did run the numbers. His question was, would it be more than 50% open space? And the answer is yes. It is more than 50% open space. I don't have an exact number, but I know it exceeds that. I think we were a little more than that, 55, 60, but it definitely was more than the 50 that he had mentioned. So I wanted to let you folks know that. With regard to what Marvin was saying, this sketch plan we've presented is trying to take advantage of the uniqueness of this property to cluster this development, to set aside these areas as open space and conservation areas. And that's really what's before you. We're just trying to get feedback from the township on our submission. It's this type of development in R2. And then we also just had some other questions in our application as well, the status of Golf Club Road, and then also the use, or if we could have shared use of your maintenance driveway going back so we could maintain the stormwater facility. We're required to have an access. Township already has an access. It's generally in the same place. And it just seemed, again, as a good planning technique. Why have two driveways if we can utilize one? So we're just here to receive your feedback tonight and answer any questions you may have.
Any questions from the board?
None from me.
No question.
Mr. Waldinger, do you or Mr. Puz have any comments or concerns regarding? I know we've received an official staff report. I wasn't sure if there's any main points you wanted to bring up.
Hi, good evening. My name is Matt Puz. The current proposal is more consistent with an R4 high-density residential development with townhouses. Unfortunately, the zoning ordinance does not permit, or rather does not have regulations regarding the conservation design developments. It would be my recommendation to, as presented, this would not meet the zoning ordinance, but I would make a recommendation to examine the zoning ordinance to permit this type of development for later use. Not in this, as a whole across the township, not in just one particular parcel.
So you're saying in all R2 districts?
Well, rather...
To allow for conservation design?
Well, in like R1, R2,
right.
The residential districts to permit this option.
Okay.
Mr. Buzz, you're saying as far as amending the actual zoning definitions in the residential districts, or are you saying to specify in the conservation option?
To specify this particular use, as well as permit it as a viable option to subdividing in residential districts as a whole, as R1, R2, R4. R3 as well.
Relative to the conservation provisions, what you're saying?
Correct, to allow this as an option.
Is there anyone else in the audience care to address the board regarding the sketch plan? Would you please state your name and address for the record, please?
My name is Eileen Tai. I live at 5632 Old Zook Road. While Mr. Gold valued his property to be well worth buying because of the infrastructure with 79, the mall being developed and things of that sort, he kind of neglected to look at the access to this community via Old Zook Road, which does not really have the infrastructure there to support the traffic that's going to accumulate from 76 units of cars. Or 76 units, they're going to have at least one car per unit coming down that road and returning home every day. He states that these units won't be visible from Golf Road or 79, but if you happen to look and you drive down either way, they will be highly visible, especially from the months of October through May when there is no vegetation there. He's totally neglected to look at how this is going to affect the community on Old Zook Road. After the ordinance, or the Planning Commission, I had an opportunity to really look at the plan that he had submitted to the commission. He has his 4 buildings or 5 buildings, I forget exactly how many. And in lighter writing at the back of the units, you see that he has written down 16 units. If you look to the side of 2 of those units, he has also 4 units. So is his intent to put 76 units in there initially, and then looking at that plan, add 16 more behind the buildings as well as 4 more to each of the other 2 buildings? There's also a question, the basin that he mentioned, is that going to be on the developable property, or is that going to be in other areas? So how is the basin going to tie into all of the buildings that he intends to put on this so-called developable acreage? And it's interesting to note that they haven't really given an exact percentage of what's going to be developable and what isn't. We get about 50, 55, maybe 60. But you would think that in making this presentation to you, they would have an exact percentage of what they're going to be developing and what not. It would certainly be interesting to have a specific number and not an estimate, because the chances are, in the long run, you will probably find that that's going to extend beyond what they actually say it is. The other issue is that there are other properties on Old Zook Road that, if this becomes a precedence, that other people will take their property and decide that they want to put high rises in there as well, which is also going to add to the increased traffic on that road. And when we brought this up 2 or 3 years ago, and they were trying to develop the Millcreek property as well as the Summit property, it was noted, and this was brought to the board's attention as well as the zoning board and the planning commission, that any developments on Summit will ultimately have to come down Old Zook Road, because there is no true access to Hershey Road for those people because of the severe ravines, unless they plan on building a bridge. So now you're looking at, in the future, if Summit becomes developable, that traffic is all going to be coming down Old Zook Road. No one has made any indication of how they're going to adjust and make that road a better road to handle all of the increased traffic that you're looking at. So these are questions that all of the neighbors are having as far as this development. We understand that the zoning has been changed and that there is going to be development at some point. However, 76 units is extensive, and if he has plans to add an additional 16 in the back of those buildings, as well as 4 units on the other 2 sides, and I'm not sure if you have that particular plan in front of you right now, but I would highly suggest that you look at it, because I didn't notice it until after we got home from the Planning Commission to see how there are more units there. So while Mr. Gold bought this property for nice investments, that's very nice. However, when he bought it, he was looking at what he thought he would like to see versus how the impact is going to be on the community of Old Zook Road. And Mr. Bach, I'd really appreciate your very timely response to me. You were the only one who did respond to me, and I appreciate that.
I have a question for Matt Puzz.
Yes. Well, ma'am, we have some questions for you.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
And I do recall your email, and I thought it was very well stated. I remember you mentioning the possibility of developing some kind of a walking trail system or pedestrian access path up and down Golf Club Road.
And they should contribute substantially to that. If they're going to increase the amount of traffic on that road, then they should be substantially supplying money to make that a better access. It's amazing the amount of people who walk that, bike it, run it, and that's going to severely impact the people who want to use that road.
Well, so your primary concern about the development is the traffic. I'll also make sure is the traffic volume being added to Old Zook Road. Would you say that's the primary concern?
That's the primary concern. Okay. And the other concern is the fact that we're being led to believe that these are not going to be visible. They are going to be visible, very visible.
Well, I guess to that point, you mentioned high rises. I wanted to ask Mr. Puzz or Mr. Waldinger, off the top of your head, I know we have height restrictions in certain districts as far as an R2 development. I mean, we don't allow high rises in R2, do we?
No, multifamily is not permitted in R2.
40-foot high, I believe, aren't they? 40 foot?
35.
35, okay, yeah.
Maximum height in R2.
Maximum height, yeah. Okay. 35, two-story.
Okay.
Okay.
So I understand, because in an R4, we would be permitting up to 4 stories, I believe.
Yeah, I think you're correct, yeah. Yeah, that would allow more of the condo design.
And so there's no, at this point, there's no one seeking a variance for the height or we're aware of, or Mr. Gold, Mr. Sanford, maybe you can address that, because I'm a little concerned about that as well, as far as what the actual design of these structures would be.
These are, right now, we're looking at 2-story, so there's no height. We're certainly below the height restriction of
Okay. And then the concern regarding it, I have it too, kind of the shaded potential extra development. Would either of you gentlemen care to comment on that, explain, is it, sorry, Mike or Marvin, about the additional units that are kind of shaded in? Is that, or is that,
I can certainly explain that. As you know, your ordinance requires a calculation of developable land. You take the gross parcel size and have subtract off certain features: wetlands, floodplain, steep slope, and then the internal traffic circulation. So there are some things about the property that are known. Is there X acres of floodplain, or is there not? Is there X acres of wetlands, or is there not? But then other factors, such as the stormwater subtraction and the internal road circulation, is more of an iterative calculation. We have to design a concept to figure out how many acres of roadways to then subtract and figure out. So that one affects the density because it's more of a trial and error or iterative calculation, as opposed to a floodplain that's a finite number. The one thing we're discussing, and we discussed at the Planning Commission meeting, the chairman, Mr. Strohmeyer, asked a question regarding the extra dashed-in units. The wetland delineation that was done on this property was done several years ago, and those are only good for a certain period of time, and then they need to be redone again. That follows Army Corps legislation of how wetland delineations are done. So this delineation is several years old, and all we were trying to do was just show on the plan, if the wetlands are what they are, or are what they were, then 76 units is what's proposed. If another delineation is done in the time period to come, and for whatever reason the wetlands are a little smaller, we just wanted to show you on our sketch plan where the additional units, if we could yield any, where they would go. We just wanted to show you, and those are dispatched in as illustrative of hopefully, if the density calculations permitted, that's where the units would go. That's why they're dashed in, just to show you where they would go.
Okay.
This illustrates the point that had I not brought this to your attention, would we have actually learned that? Because it was not mentioned at the Planning Commission. And it's interesting, though, that it's almost as if things are trying to be pushed through without the public really knowing about it. And that's a concern. We've been through this before as far as the infrastructure with the zoning board and with the Planning Commission and with the supervisors and things of that sort. And then in learning this explanation that they could feasibly add how many more units, had I not asked, there would be no clarification. And then the next thing you know, we have an additional 20 units that we weren't really anticipating because their proposal is 76.
Okay. Mr. Walding, you want to address that?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify something for the board to address one of Ms. Ty's comments about the variability in the numbers and the fact that there isn't any real solid numbers with this. Just want to remind you that this is a sketch plan, and one of the reasons that the township has a sketch plan process is so that a developer can propose a development and get feedback without any approvals. So nothing will be decided today. There will be no approvals. And it's to prevent them from having to spend a lot of money on engineering and other costs for a proposal that may not be approved or look favorably upon. So there's a lot of estimating done in the sketch plan process, But when a final plan is brought in for this or any other piece of property, then those numbers actually have to be proven through engineering methods and actually locked down. So that's a reason why there's a lot of estimates and rough numbers at this stage, because a lot of that field work has not been performed yet.
I appreciate your response, but I would really like to know that this is going to be on the record at this meeting when it's being proposed versus when it's actually being submitted, so that you're aware that there is opposition to this from the very beginning.
Oh, absolutely. One question I have for you, Mr. Wellinger. I know through our formal land development process, surrounding property owners are notified of land developments?
Yes, actually, everybody that got a letter for the sketch plan meeting would also receive one for.
Oh, so there was a notice sent out about the sketch plan?
We treat sketch plans, at least as far as notification in the public hearing, as if it were an actual plan where we notify all the adjoining members or property owners so that they can, come in and have their say and speak to the plan.
Okay, so we did notify folks about the planning commission meeting and this meeting then?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, I myself have a question here. I did receive an email from Mr. DiMatteo, but I don't recall getting one from you, and I do check my spam files.
I sent it to all three of you.
Okay, it's funny, I didn't recall getting it, but I did get one from Mr. DiMatteo, and I believe you two are together?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, I replied back to him, so I'm not sure if it was shared with you or not, but I did reply back to him. The question I have for Matt Puzz or Matt Waldinger, either one, what's the possible number of units that could be on there once you take out the usable land on it? Or what's in the worst case, if you want to call it the worst case scenario?
If we subdivide the land out fully, it would be 76.
76. That's what's allowed under the ordinance
Based
there.
on the
Okay.
wetland
delineation and then the sloping lands that you can't use and so on. So it could be 38 two-unit buildings, or what was that, 5, I think it was, of the more clustered buildings that were put together. And still keep it within the treed area there under a conservation design. So I'm not sure, because let's keep in mind that this is a sketch plan, and the developer, like any other developer, has a right to see what's, to test the waters, to see what's going to happen. This is not unusual. We've had sketch plans in the past. We'll have to see if Mr. Gold, if he can put the numbers together to see if he can go with the comments, see what can be done, and see what happens there. I'm not sure. He might look at it and say, hey, the numbers just don't work, and leave the property alone. Don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else like to address the board regarding the sketch plan?
Hello, Mike DiMatteo, 5632 Old Zook Road.
Right.
And I did write a letter to all the supervisors, just voicing my
I got yours, yes.
Yes, and I would just like to add that one thing that concerns me is if we cluster all these units together, okay, first of all, you have to kind of think, what are we going to do with those units? So I don't think you're going to see people buying that type of a unit.
Okay.
And, more than likely, they're going to end up being rental units.
Okay.
And that just opens the door up there for more rental units to be constructed in that area. When you look at the comprehensive plan as of right now, it states that that is to be used for residential use. It's designated on the plan, the last plan I saw, and I don't believe, I asked Matthew if it has been redone, and it's in the process of being redone right now. But as of now, it is designated as a residential area. And we're just concerned, again, that it's going to end up being 78 apartment units.
You are aware that rentals are residential in nature.
Yes, that's correct.
They're just different classifications.
Right, and we just don't want to see our side of the street end up like the other side of the street. If you look at Old Zook to the north, of Zimmerly Road.
Yeah.
You know, it's congested with a lot of apartment buildings.
Okay.
And right now, we have a nice residential area there. You know, when you drive up that road, there's a lot of large lots of land. There's a lot of individuals that that own the land. And
Now, you live to the north there, right? You live down near Head Drive? Is where
towards that direction, correct.
Right. So, in other words, for you to go up there, you have to like walk up there or whatever you're doing. You don't go by it every day. Am I correct?
Well, I mean, we do not go by it every day, but we do.
Okay. You head north to get down to Simmerly Road, or continue on Old Zook Road to get to wherever your destination might be.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. It's just that if you build a cluster there, if you move, let's see, if you move to the north, okay, there's a 40-acre lot that sits there.
Okay.
Now, who's to say if that person eventually won't sell that? Now you already have a cluster unit there.
Okay. Can you excuse me 1 second? Do you guys happen to know off the top of your head what the zoning is there? I know Mr. Gold's property is R2. What is the rest of it heading north on?
I believe it's rural residential.
RR, yeah. Okay, different zoning classification.
Right, but I mean, it just like Mr. Gold, they could go and have the rezoning changed. I mean, it's I don't know about, don't nod your head. I mean, he applied for the rezoning. It went by very easily. And I just want to also make note, just for a little bit of history, just so everybody's aware, he did apply for R4.
Right.
And that was denied by the supervisors.
And we voted it to be R2.
Right.
I'm the only supervisor on the board at that time. I'm very familiar with it. Yes.
And we appreciate that. I mean, it upheld.
It went to R2, yes.
Right, correct. And I think the reasoning behind that, to allow the R2, again, was to keep the density to a minimum.
Yeah, well, we do allow our R2 rezoning, but it still was appealed, I think, all the way up to the state courts, right? Am I correct on that?
What's that?
It was appealed, the rezoning, am I correct?
Correct.
That even though we lowered the zoning category, it was still appealed to higher courts. I think, did it go to the Supreme Court, or did it went to the Superior Court?
It went to the Commonwealth.
Commonwealth Court, okay.
Correct.
Went to Common Pleas, and then it went up, and I think that's where it stopped. I know it went to the state level courts, so, okay.
But, you know...
and that was for the rezoning?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, the other thing I wanted to make a comment on was Mr. Putz. He said that we as a township may want to look at the zoning in general and if we should allow a conservation area to be allowed in an R1 or an R2.
We actually do have that language. It's just broad. I think what Mr. Puzz is suggesting, we should actually put specifications in there.
Okay.
And I tend to agree. I think some of the arguments I think have been made about this property is since we have that so vague, the board can have the discretion to determine that, which I'm not comfortable with. I would much rather have set regs. And for example, the concerns that have come up so far, for example, about the height of the structure. We clearly do not want to allow a high rise.
Right.
Because of a conservation designation. So, but the conservation language doesn't say we can't. So there are things that we do need to clarify for all future development because our zoning code seems to have a bit of a loophole in it.
And I just would like to comment that I think we need to be careful with that also. Not only do we need to have a consideration with height, but again, how compressed you're going to allow that. And the reason I say that is because you could take any lot within Millcreek Township and you could compress the units on that lot and you could call that a conservation district. I mean, I understand where Mr. Groh was going when he was saying about how many units were allowed or are allowed up there. What's the maximum amount of units? And the answer to that is 78. And so either way, if you spread it out or you condense it, it's going to end up being the same. It's 78 units. But you have to look at how you're going to allow those 78 units. Now, when you compress that all into one area, like I stated in my email, that could have detrimental effects to the environment also. I mean, you're taking that central area, and all you're going to have there is concrete and buildings. That's it. There's not going to be any trees. You can't plant a tree in the middle of a parking lot. And you know, if you develop it, say in the existing zoning in that structure, where you have 2-unit complexes and you have them scattered about, you could still have green space in between there. You can still have trees in between each of the buildings, and ultimately it could also blend in. Right. And there's areas within Millcreek that are classified as conservation neighborhoods, and they have followed the zoning. Okay. So there was one, I can't think of the name of it, but it was built in, I think it was 2011. If you Google conservation development, and it was done off of Steratania Road in Millcreek. It was in a rural area, so the maximum density was 2.5 per acre, and they built it within those restrictions, spreading it out, and it ended up being a conservation development. So I think we really need to take a hard look also as how compressed we want to allow these to be.
Would you rather see 38 units of two unit duplexes?
I would.
Okay, there's going to be considerably more trees cut down to do that.
But again, it
would almost be like clear cutting it, I would think. I don't know, Mr. Sanford, am I correct on that by putting 38 duplex units in there to get the equivalent of 76? That would be clearing a lot of trees out of there.
Yes, I mean, that's an area where you have to essentially develop the whole property to construct a network of roadways, lots.
Right.
You know, and you have to have the requisite setbacks
Well,
from each unit. So essentially,
yeah, it's a clear cut for the most.
I mean, it doesn't have to be that way, though.
Right.
I mean, it's all how you want to handle it. Now, the division on Steratania didn't end up being that way.
Right.
So, I mean, that's his perspective on things, and he could be using that as leverage. I mean, you just have to be careful.
Okay.
And we're just worried that, again, if we allow that to happen, then the next lot, they request zoning, and it's a lot easier for them to get R4 zoning when there's a congested complex right next door to it.
Well, Mr. Naim, I'm going to have to close discussion on it. I think we generally allow about 5 minutes for comment. Do you feel you've expressed your concerns adequately?
Yes, I have.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions or comments from the board? Sure.
just to clarify a couple of points, and it won't be very long. The 2011 development he referenced was never constructed. Yeah. That was on Steratania Road. It was a plan, never built. As far as the percentage of open space, I mentioned Mr. Skelly was inquiring at the Planning Commission if it was more than 50. I've just answered his question. Yes, it's more than 50. And then as far as the future units, possible units, and that was all discussed at the Planning Commission meeting when she mentioned it wasn't. And I'm telling you it was. The chairman of the board, he directly asked me that question, and I answered it for him to explain the wetland delineation and the timing.
Thank you, Mr. Stanford.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Okay.
So at this point, we've determined is currently our ordinances would not allow us this type of development. I understand the request for the conservation consideration was made. We don't have standards for that. Gentlemen, I would think we would recommend our zoning officer, our director of planning development, to consider the impacts, to consider what those standards might be for this board and the planning commission to consider before moving forward any kind of development.
That's correct.
Regarding
yes.
the conservation use.
Right. That's correct.
Any further comments from the board? Next item on the agenda. Should we release the high school kids?
Kids from high school, do you guys need your paperwork signed, your homework? Why don't you come on up now and you can leave? It's almost bedtime.
I think I signed all there.
Well, this young lady came in after.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Just make sure your teacher doesn't watch the video.
Yes. Yeah, there we go. Oh, she's taking notes too. Good. Thank you. There you go. Thanks.
Have a
Sure
nice
thing.
evening.
Yeah, take care.
Next on the agenda is a non-substantial land development plan amendment, Accudyne 2018 edition, approved at the meeting of March 27th, 2018. Mr. Waldinger?
Yeah, thank you, gentlemen. This is a land development plan that the board just approved last month. As part of their building process, they had an issue with BIU regarding the fire rating of their new addition. So they chose to go to the UCC Board of Appeals to address that. The board granted their appeal with a few requirements. Those two requirements were that the west property line be moved further west and that a 50-foot ingress easement be provided south of the building. Both of those items in order to provide more access for fire apparatus around the building. The plan in front of you today, the amended plan, reflects those two changes. There are no changes to the building location, size, or any of the stormwater management. It just reflects the fact that the property line to the west, the developer actually owned an additional piece of property to the west, so they filed a combination deed to add that to this parcel. So the plan reflects that and also shows the 50-foot easement to the south of the building. So Township Engineer Ann Sokol has recommended approval of this land development amendment, and we would ask for your consideration.
Any questions from the board? Would anyone in the audience care to address the board regarding this issue? All right, hearing none. Is there a motion to approve the non-substantial land development plan amendment for Accudyne?
Yeah, I'll move for that approval.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Groh?
I vote yes.
Mr. Bach?
I vote yes.
And I vote yes. Next item is referral to the Planning Commission of a petition requesting a change in zoning classification. The first is William Keitlinger and Gail Elmer for a property located at 3303 West 26th Street, now zoned R1 Single Family Residential, asking for a change in classification to C1 Local Commercial, Township Index 3220-001, County Index 33-69-264-4. Is there a motion to refer this rezoning request to the Planning Commission?
Yes, I will move to refer that application to the Planning Commission for the next meeting.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Groh?
Yes?
Mr. Bach?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Next is NLA Real Estate Holdings LLC for property located at 4341 West Ridge Road and empty lot east of 4341 West Ridge Road, now zoned R1 Single Family Residential, all in C2 General Commercial and C3 Highway Commercial, requesting for a change in classification to R4 High Density Residential, Township Index 414-016 and 457-024, County Index 33-55-242-82.82, and 33-56-242-88. Is there a motion to refer the zoning request to the Planning Commission?
Yes, I'll move.
Is there a second?
I will second.
Mr. Grove?
Yes.
Mr. Bach?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Next is Raz
Development.
Raz Development 1 LLC for property located at 2055, 2103, 2155, and 2209 Edinburgh Road, now zoned RR Rural Residential, asking for a change in classification to R4 High Density Residential, Township Index 738-040, 050, 052, and 020, County Index 33-187-584-10, Also 33-188-584-13, also 33-188-584-33.01, and 33-187-584-9. Is there a motion to refer this rezoning to the Planning Commission?
Yes, I'll move.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Grove?
I vote yes.
Mr. Bach?
Yes.
And I vote yes. I know Mr. McGrath will love reading those numbers out. I would like to make a motion that we change procedures.
Yes. Well, I was going to ask you if you could repeat all that.
This is the MPD requests. I don't have any in my packet. Is there any?
No, I conferred with Chief Height today, and there are no requests.
It was the first time for everything.
Yeah.
All right.
Wow.
Student Ambassador Report.
The McDowell Academic Challenge team is going to head to Harrisburg the weekend of April 28th for their state competition. So we just want to wish those contestants good luck, and hopefully they bring home some hardware.
Yes. Great.
All right. Solicitor Communications.
The only thing I would like to mention is we had a hearing this morning before the PLCB hearing officer with respect to the township's petition to exempt the township from the enforcement of the noise requirements under the PLCB ordinance. In its place would be the noise ordinance that the township passed last summer that would then be enforced by the police department. I thought the hearing went well, thanks to Mr. Grow, who was one of the witnesses, as well as Chief Height and Officer Leone. I thought it was very informative. I thought the hearing officer received the evidence well and understood the importance of enforcing the noise ordinance in general that it is to the township. So we would expect, I think, to have a draft opinion or a proposed opinion from the hearing officer in the next couple of weeks, and then the PLCB board, I believe, will be voting on it mid-May.
Yep. Okay.
So.
Any questions from the board?
No.
All right. Next on the agenda is the collective bargaining agreement for AFSCME, which is one of our labor unions here at the township. We had that on our agenda. We've been negotiating with the AFSCME labor union for about a year and a half now over a new contract. We had reached a tentative agreement with the negotiating team. The union met earlier today. We anticipated approving a contract this evening. We were informed the union rejected the proposal. So I don't know if we need to table this indefinitely, Mr. Shaw, or?
Yeah, I would just simply, table it indefinitely and, just essentially remove it from the agenda at this point.
Is there a motion to table the collective bargaining agreement for AFSCME?
Yes, I'll move to table this.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Groh?
Yes.
Mr. Bach?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Citizens to be heard.
Eileen Ty, 5632 Old Zook Road. One of the reasons that we come here early to voice our concerns was pretty well illustrated watching the board refer the RAS development to the Planning Commission for rezoning from rural resident to your R4 high-density residential plan that they want. I've witnessed here numerous times people who have not come forward and spoken how they feel about things. And the likelihood of someone coming and complaining to the Planning Commission the next time about this particular issue, well, undoubtedly it will be passed with no concern whatsoever, and then the citizens will realize that their whole neighborhood is being rezoned, and a substantial amount of issues are going to arise. And I find it interesting that you question why I come here early and voice my concerns when you easily passed this referral off to the Planning Committee without even questioning why you would want to go from rural route to high-density
Right, Ms. Ty, if I can, I apologize for not clarifying it when we got to that point in the agenda. Per the municipality's planning code, it's a procedural issue that a rezoning petition needs to be formally referred to the Planning Commission. I don't believe we can procedurally block the referral.
I
Is that-
understand the process, but I just think it's interesting because people wonder why we voice concerns so early in the process.
Mhm.
This is one reason why, because people probably won't show up at that planning commission, and the planning commission won't hesitate to change it from rural route to high density.
Well, I appreciate your concerns, but I served in the planning commission for the better part of 5 years, and I can assure you our planning commission has never just blanketly approved blanket rezonings. We've denied them, I think, more than we approved them when I was on that board.
Well, I plan on attending that planning commission meeting and see how easily it passes or doesn't pass.
And I further just want to clarify that we notify every resident for rezoning within, is it?
500 feet, yeah.
So we do actually through direct mail notify residents of the planning commission meeting and the supervisor meeting that any rezoning.
If you're looking at
It's gonna
rural
happen.
residencies, there are probably not a lot of people who are going to get that letter if you're only notifying within 500 feet.
It's a large parcel and it abuts a subdivision, so there actually are, at least in this case.
Okay.
quite-
Let me add something here. The municipality's planning code requires the municipality to do two things. The requirement is, first is to post the property. Second thing is to put a legal ad in the newspaper. We go above and beyond that. We're not required to, but we did as a courtesy to go 500 feet, all directions around that property. I think we go out above, and I've worked in several municipalities as a zoning and planning administrator, and I think we're very generous in that as far as notifying property owners. And then of course, if word gets around among the property owners, yes, then they will be, they'll be taken in as witnesses, any testimony they might want to offer there. I think we're doing more than what we're required to do.
And that's
I'm sorry
appreciated. But I
I'm
just
sorry you
find
feel
it
different
interesting
about that.
people question why we come here early and voice concerns
I
when something
understand.
like this happens.
I understand.
I don't believe that. Did I question why you're here? I
No.
understand exactly why
No,
you're here,
but
and I
you're-
appreciate you being here.
You're indicating to me during my point that this is just a proposal and that nothing is concrete. My point to you was that I want to come here early and voice opposition
Absolutely.
to
That
this particular
makes a
thing,
lot of
whether it's
sense.
a proposal or a concrete plan.
Right, absolutely.
But oftentimes, that doesn't happen. People don't understand the process. They don't come in, and then all of a sudden, they realize that things have
Sure.
changed drastically and affected their lifestyle, and many choose to move out of Millcreek.
Well, and I'm sorry you're frustrated with the process. I really am. But even this evening for sketch plans, we don't require hearings on sketch plans per our ordinance, but we opened it up because we knew it was a controversial issue that folks would want to express their opinions on. Typically for a sketch plan, we only take written comments. So we do try to accommodate residents who are concerned. We do our best to notify residents that we feel could be potentially impacted by rezonings and developments. And I just want you to know we take comments very seriously. I take comments very seriously, and I know our planning
appreciate that.
commissioners
Thank
do as
you.
well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Someone else here, but I should probably just ask. Anybody else wants? Okay. Anything else to go to the order?
No.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
At 9:17 p.m.
Is there a second?
Second.
We are adjourned.
You're watching the Millcreek Government Channel, powered by WQLN Public Media.